Samantha and David's wedding was the most talked-about event in their town. It was a grand celebration, held in a beautiful garden filled with white roses and golden lights. The evening sky was clear, and the soft glow of candles made everything feel magical. Samantha, the bride, looked stunning in her elegant white gown, and David, the groom, stood tall and proud in his sharp black suit. They were the perfect couple, at least in the eyes of those who didn't know the hidden tensions behind their love story. Samantha came from a wealthy and traditional family. Her parents had always imagined her marrying someone from a similar background. But David was different. He was a self-made man, someone who had worked hard to achieve success. He had built his own company from nothing, proving that determination and talent could take a person far. Despite his achievements, Samantha's family never fully accepted him. They smiled in public, acted polite, and played their roles well, but David could feel the unspoken judgment in their eyes. However, David didn't let their opinions affect his love for Samantha. He truly believed in their relationship. He had always known that love wasn't about money, background, or social status. It was about two people choosing to stand by each other no matter what. Samantha, too, had fought for their love. She had convinced her family that David was the right person for her, and despite their reservations, they had finally agreed to the wedding, or at least that's what David thought. As the guests arrived, everything seemed perfect. The tables were decorated with the finest silverware, and the food was carefully prepared by the best chefs in town. People laughed, danced, and celebrated the union of two souls. But underneath all the joy, there was tension in the air. David noticed how Samantha's father barely spoke to him. Her mother only gave him a forced smile. Even some of her distant relatives whispered among themselves whenever he walked past. Still, David chose to ignore it. He was here for Samantha. And that was all that mattered. The ceremony was beautiful, and when they finally said their vows, he felt nothing but happiness. When Samantha placed the ring on his finger, he believed that their love had conquered all obstacles. He held her hand tightly, silently promising that he would always stand by her side. As the night went on, the newlyweds took their first dance. The music played softly, and they moved in perfect harmony. The guests clapped and cheered, capturing photos and videos of the happy couple. But just as David thought the night would end on a perfect note, something unexpected happened, something that would change everything. Samantha's smile slowly faded, and in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by everyone they knew, she did something no one could have ever imagined. The guests were still clapping as Samantha and David danced together under the sparkling lights. Their first dance as husband and wife was supposed to be a moment of joy, a memory they would cherish forever. But something had changed in Samantha's face. The warmth in her eyes had disappeared, replaced by frustration. David noticed it immediately. Her grip on his hand tightened, and her body became stiff. He could sense that something was wrong, but he had no idea what was coming next. The music continued to play, but the atmosphere had shifted. Samantha suddenly stopped dancing, pulling away from David. The crowd grew silent, confused by the sudden change. At first, David thought she might be feeling unwell, so he reached up to her gently. But before he could say anything, Samantha's expression darkened, and in an instant, she raised her hand and slapped him across the face. A loud gasp spread through the hall. The sound of the slap echoed, making the moment even more shocking. The guests froze in disbelief. The music stopped. The laughter, the chatter, the joyful energy. Everything disappeared in an instant. Everyone's eyes were now locked on the bride and groom, trying to understand what had just happened. David stood still, stunned. He could feel the sting on his cheek, but the pain in his heart was much deeper. His mind raced, searching for an explanation. Had he done something wrong? Had he said something that upset her? But he knew he hadn't. Just moments ago, they had been dancing, celebrating their love. What could have changed so suddenly? Samantha's face was filled with emotion, but it wasn't regret. She looked angry, almost as if she had been holding something inside for too long and had finally let it out. She didn't say anything. She didn't apologize. Instead, she turned her back and took a step away from David. David glanced at the guests. Some people were whispering, others were completely silent. His friends looked shocked, while Samantha's family remained strangely calm, as if they had expected something like this to happen. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One of David's close friends took a step forward, ready to defend him. But David raised a hand, stopping him. He didn't want to create a scene. He didn't want this moment to turn into something even worse. His heart was heavy, but he refused to react in anger. Samantha's bridesmaids exchanged nervous looks, unsure of what to do. The wedding planner, who had worked so hard to make this day perfect, stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth. It was clear that no one had seen this coming. David took a deep breath. His face remained calm, but inside, his emotions were swirling. He had always believed that love required patience and understanding. But in this moment, he had to ask himself, was this really the love he had fought so hard for? As the silence stretched on, everyone waited for his response. No one could have predicted what he was going to do next. The room remained silent. It felt as if time had stopped. Everyone was staring at David, waiting to see how he would react. Some expected him to walk away. Others thought he might say something in anger. But David did neither. Instead, he stood still, looking at Samantha with calm eyes. His cheek was still burning from the slap, but he showed no sign of pain. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. Samantha, on the other hand, seemed lost in her own emotions. Her hands trembled slightly, and her breathing was heavy. It was clear that she had acted on impulse, but now she didn't know what to do next. She hadn't expected David to stay so calm. She had thought he would argue, maybe even storm out of the wedding. But his silence made her more nervous than if he had shouted. The guests began whispering among themselves. Some leaned over to their friends, asking if they had seen what just happened. A few of them pulled out their phones, not to record, but to message others about the unexpected drama. Samantha's family remained seated, their faces unreadable. It was almost as if they didn't think this was a big deal. But David's friends were furious. They couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. David finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. "Samantha," he said softly, "do you realize what you just did?" Samantha's lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She looked around, seeing all the eyes on her, and a wave of embarrassment washed over her. She had let her emotions take control in the worst possible way. And now she was the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. "I don't know what happened," she finally whispered, her voice shaking. She stopped herself, unsure of how to explain. David didn't look away. He wasn't angry, but he wasn't going to ignore what had happened either. "This is supposed to be our wedding day," he continued. "A day of love, not a day of hurt." His words hung in the air, making the guests shift uncomfortably. They had expected a dramatic reaction, but instead, David had chosen to respond with dignity. It was something not many people could do in such a situation. One of the older guests, an elderly woman who had been watching everything closely, shook her head and whispered to her husband, "That young man has more strength in his heart than most people ever will." Samantha lowered her head, realizing that she had not only hurt David, but had also embarrassed herself. The weight of her actions finally hit her, and she felt her eyes fill with tears. This was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. Instead, she had turned it into something neither of them would ever forget, for all the wrong reasons. As David stood there, still waiting for an explanation, the entire room held its breath. No one knew what would happen next, but one thing was certain. This wedding had taken a turn that no one could have predicted. David slowly reached for the microphone that had been used for the wedding speeches earlier. The hall was still silent, except for the occasional whispers from guests who couldn't believe what had just happened. His movements were calm, but his heart was heavy. He had never imagined his wedding day would turn into something like this. Samantha stood frozen, her hands clasped together as if she wanted to disappear. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, but now, in front of everyone, she didn't know how to fix it. The weight of so many eyes on her made her feel small, and for the first time in her life, she truly felt ashamed. David tapped the microphone gently, and the soft sound echoed through the room. He wasn't someone who liked public drama, but this moment needed to be addressed. He couldn't just pretend nothing had happened. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Everyone," he began, his voice steady, "I know you all came here today to celebrate love, joy, and the start of a new journey. But life doesn't always go the way we expect. And sometimes, in the most important moments, we are tested in ways we never imagined." Some of the guests nodded, while others leaned in closer, eager to hear what he was going to say next. Samantha's eyes filled with tears. She had expected David to yell, to shame her in front of everyone, but instead, he was handling the situation with grace. "I believe in love," David continued. "I believe in respect, kindness, and understanding. Love is not just about the good times. It's about how we handle the hard moments too. And right now, this is one of those moments." A deep silence filled the room. Samantha swallowed hard, feeling the tears spill down her cheeks. She had hurt the man who loved her, and yet here he was, standing in front of everyone, speaking with wisdom and patience instead of anger. David turned to Samantha, looking her in the eyes. "I don't know why you did what you did," he said honestly. "Maybe it was stress, maybe it was pressure, or maybe there's something deeper that we never talked about. But what I do know is that respect is the foundation of any marriage, and without it, love cannot survive." Samantha's lips trembled. She wanted to say something, to apologize, but her voice wouldn't come out. David sighed and placed the microphone down. He turned to the guests and gave a small, polite nod. "I think we all need a moment." With that, he stepped away, walking toward the exit of the hall. The guests murmured in shock. Some were amazed at his calmness, while others wondered if he was leaving for good. Samantha stood there, watching him walk away, feeling her heart break. She had never expected this reaction. She had thought she knew how the night would go, but now, everything was uncertain. And for the first time in her life, she was truly afraid of what might happen next. Samantha stood frozen as David walked away. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her vision blurred with tears. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but instead, it had turned into something she never could have imagined. The guests were still in shock. Some whispered among themselves, others shook their heads in disappointment. Samantha could hear bits and pieces of their conversations. How could she do that to him? He handled it so well. Most people would have walked out in anger. Is this wedding even going to continue? Her bridesmaids stood nearby, their faces filled with concern. One of them, her closest friend, gently touched her arm. "Samantha," she whispered, "you need to fix this." Samantha wiped her tears quickly. She had never felt this much guilt before. She had let her emotions take control, and now she had pushed away the man who loved her. David had every right to be upset. She didn't even know why she had reacted that way. Maybe it was the pressure from her family, the expectations, the silent judgment she had felt from them. But none of that was an excuse for what she had done. She took a shaky breath and stepped forward, her dress feeling heavier than before. With every step she took, she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had to find David. She had to make things right. She walked past the guests, ignoring the stares and whispers. She reached the doors of the hall and stepped outside. The cool night air hit her face, and for a moment, she just stood there, trying to gather the courage to face him. Then she saw him. David was standing near a small fountain in the garden, his hands in his pockets, looking down at the water. He looked deep in thought, as if trying to decide what to do next. Samantha hesitated, but she knew she couldn't run away from this. Slowly, she approached him. "David," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't turn around at first. He just let out a long breath before finally looking at her. His eyes weren't angry, but they were filled with sadness. That hurt more than if he had been mad. Samantha felt her throat tighten. I don't know what came over me," she admitted. "I was overwhelmed. I let the pressure get to me, and I hurt you. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I am truly, truly sorry." David studied her for a moment. The silence stretched between them, heavy with emotions. Finally, he spoke. "Do you understand what you did, Samantha? This isn't just about what happened in front of everyone. It's about what it means for us. A marriage can't survive without trust and respect." Tears spilled down her face. "I know," she whispered. "I don't want to lose you. Please, give me a chance to make this right." David looked at her, his expression unreadable. A long pause followed. And then he spoke the words that would decide their future. David looked at Samantha for a long time. The sadness in his eyes made her heart ache even more. She had never seen him like this before. He had always been strong, always the one to stay calm in any situation. But tonight, she had hurt him in a way she never thought possible. The night air was cool, and the soft sound of the fountain filled the silence between them. Samantha waited, hoping, praying that David would give her another chance. She wanted to take back what she had done, but she knew that wasn't possible. All she could do now was ask for forgiveness. David sighed, running a hand over his face. "Samantha," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm, "I love you. I always have. But love isn't just about feelings. It's about actions. And tonight, I don't know if you understand how deeply your actions hurt me." Samantha felt a tear roll down her cheek. "I do," she whispered. "I know I was wrong. I lost control of my emotions, and I did something unforgivable. But David, I swear, it wasn't about you. It was about me, about my fears, my pressure, my own weaknesses." David nodded slowly, processing her words. "I don't want a marriage where I have to fear that, one day when things get hard, you'll hurt me again. That's not love, Samantha. That's not the kind of marriage I dreamed of." His words cut deep. Samantha knew he was right. Respect was the foundation of any strong relationship, and she had broken that in front of everyone. She took a deep breath. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," she admitted. "But I want to prove to you that I can be better, that I can learn from this. Please, David, don't let this be the end of us." David studied her face. He could see the regret in her eyes, the genuine sorrow in her voice. He had never loved anyone the way he loved her, but love alone wasn't enough to fix what had happened. Trust had been broken, and trust took time to rebuild. "I need to think, Samantha," he finally said. "I need time." Samantha's heart dropped, but she nodded. She couldn't expect him to just move on like nothing had happened. "I understand," she whispered. "Take all the time you need. Just, please don't shut me out completely." David sighed again, looking up at the sky as if searching for answers. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted, "but I do know that tonight changed everything." Samantha felt her chest tighten. She wanted to hold him, to take away the pain she had caused, but she knew she couldn't rush this. As they stood there in the quiet night, both of them knew that their love story wasn't over, but the road ahead was uncertain, and what happened next would determine whether their marriage would survive, or if this was the beginning of the end. The next morning, Samantha woke up with a heavy heart. She had barely slept, replaying the events of the night over and over in her mind. The wedding reception had ended awkwardly, with guests unsure whether to stay or leave. Eventually, the celebration had faded into silence, and Samantha had gone home alone. David had chosen to stay at a hotel, needing space to think. Now, as she sat on the edge of her bed, she felt lost. Her wedding day was supposed to be the beginning of a beautiful journey, but instead, it had turned into a painful memory. She picked up her phone and stared at David's name on the screen. She wanted to call him, to hear his voice, to know what he was thinking. But she was afraid. What if he had already made his decision? What if he had decided to walk away from their marriage before it had even truly begun? A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Her mother stepped inside, her face filled with concern. "Samantha, sweetheart," her mother said gently, sitting beside her. "I know you're hurting." Tears welled up in Samantha's eyes. "I don't know what to do, Mom," she admitted. "I made a terrible mistake. What if I'd lost David forever?" Her mother sighed, taking her hand. "You can't change the past, but you can take responsibility for it. You need to show David that you truly regret what happened and that you're willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." Samantha nodded, wiping away a tear. She knew her mother was right. Words alone wouldn't be enough. She had to prove to David that she was ready to change. Meanwhile, at the hotel, David sat on the balcony, staring at the morning sky. His mind was filled with thoughts of Samantha. He still loved her. There was no doubt about that. But love wasn't the only thing that mattered in a marriage. Trust, respect, and understanding were just as important. And last night, all of that had been shaken. His best friend, Michael, joined him outside, handing him a cup of coffee. "Rough night?" Michael asked, already knowing the answer. David let out a small, tired laugh. "That's an understatement." Michael sat beside him. "So what now? Are you leaving her?" David exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't know, man. I love her, but I don't want to be in a marriage where I feel disrespected." Michael nodded. "That's fair. But I also know that Samantha isn't a bad person. She made a mistake, yes, a big one. But if she truly regrets it and wants to change, don't you think she deserves a chance to prove that?" David didn't answer right away. He knew Michael had a point. Samantha wasn't cruel. She had simply let her emotions get the best of her. But could he trust that it wouldn't happen again? As he sat there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed. A message from Samantha. "Can we meet? Please." David stared at the screen. This was the moment. Would he give her the chance to make things right, or was this the end of their love story? David read the message again, his fingers hovering over the screen. He knew this conversation was necessary, but he still wasn't sure what he wanted to say. His heart was conflicted. A part of him wanted to go back to Samantha, to forgive her and move forward. But another part of him was still hurt, still questioning if their love could survive what had happened. After a deep breath, he finally replied, "Okay, let's meet." Samantha's heart pounded when she saw his message. She quickly got ready, not wanting to waste any time. She chose a simple dress, one that David had once said made her look beautiful. She wasn't trying to impress him. She just wanted to remind him of the love they had shared before everything went wrong. They agreed to meet at a small cafe near the hotel. When Samantha arrived, she saw David already sitting at a table, staring into his cup of coffee. He looked tired, as if he had spent the whole night thinking. Slowly, she walked over and sat across from him. "David," she said softly. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Samantha." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of everything that had happened hung between them like a shadow. Finally, Samantha took a deep breath. "I know I hurt you," she said, "and I don't expect you to forget it overnight. But I want you to know that I truly, deeply regret what I did. Not just because it happened in front of everyone, but because I hurt the man I love." David listened, his fingers tapping lightly against the coffee cup. He didn't interrupt her, so she continued. "I've spent the whole night thinking about why I reacted the way I did. And I realized something. I let my own fears and pressure control me. I was so afraid of how people saw me, of what my family expected, that I forgot what truly matters." She looked into his eyes, her voice filled with emotion. "You matter, David, more than anything." David sighed. "Samantha, love isn't just about emotions. It's about respect, trust, and how we handle the difficult moments. Last night, you broke something between us." Tears welled up in Samantha's eyes, but she nodded. "I know. And I don't want to lose you because of my mistake. I want to work on myself. I want to be a better wife, a better partner. But I also understand that you need time. David looked at her for a long moment. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the regret in her face. This wasn't just words. She truly wanted to change. Finally, he reached across the table and took her hand. I'm not going to walk away, Samantha, he said. But this won't be easy. We need to rebuild the trust we lost. And that's going to take time and effort from both of us. A tear slipped down Samantha's cheek, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was from relief. I'm ready, she whispered. David gave a small nod. Then let's take this one step at a time, together. As they sat there, holding hands, they both knew the road ahead wouldn't be perfect. But love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other, even in the hardest moments. And today, they had chosen to fight for their love.